the route that changed the world. The incredible story of the collapse of the Kwantung Army. Have you ever wondered how the course of world history can be altered in just a few days? How an army considered invincible was literally wiped off the face of the earth in a lightning-fast blitzkrieg that, for some reason, is spoken of far less today than other battles of the Second World War. We're talking about the event that became the final chord of the most terrible war in human history, an event in which the Soviet soldier put a decisive period, forcing the last ally of Hitler, militarist Japan, to capitulate. This is not merely a story about a military operation. It is a story about incredible strength of spirit, brilliant strategies, desperate resistance, and how one swift strike by the Red Army saved hundreds of thousands of lives and predetermined the fate of the entire Far East. Get ready. We are heading to August of 45 to the vast lands of Manchuria, where one of the largest and most impressive battles in history unfolded. Why was this necessary? The economic and political background. Before we delve into the description of the fighting, let us ask ourselves, why did the USSR commit its troops, who had just emerged from the crucible of war with Germany, to a new theater of military operations? The answer lies in grand politics and economics. By the middle of 45, Japan was no longer what it once had been. Its navy and air force had been largely destroyed by the Americans, but its ground army remained a colossal force. Its most powerful formation was none other than the Kwantung Army, stationed in Manchuria, northeastern China. This was not just a military unit. It was the stronghold of Japanese militarism, a state within a state. Manchuria was everything to Japan, its industrial heart, source of resources, and springboard for expansion. Coal was mined here, steel produced, and gigantic military factories operated. Control over this region allowed Japan to continue the war even while cut off from the home islands. American analysts calculated that an invasion of the Japanese home islands would cost them up to 1 million soldiers' lives, not counting millions of Japanese civilian casualties. And here the Soviet Union entered the stage. The Allies implored Stalin to join the war. At the Yalta Conference, he was promised the return of southern Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands. But this was not the only reason. The USSR understood that if it did not participate in Japan's defeat, the post-war world order in the Far East would be shaped without its involvement. This was a matter of global influence. Joseph Stalin gave his marshals a clear task, not merely to win, but to annihilate, quickly, crushingly, and demonstratively, so the whole world would understand that the Red Army was a force capable of deciding the fate of continents. The operational plan, devised by the finest Soviet military minds, particularly Marshal Alexander Vasilevsky, was brilliant in its simplicity and audacity. It was to be a classic blitzkrieg, but under non-classical conditions, through mountains, deserts, and impassable forests. The night that changed everything, the 9th of August. Precisely at 1 o'clock in the morning, from the 8th to the 9th of August local time, the sky above the border between the Soviet Union and Manchuria, the puppet state created by Japan, lit up with thousands of flashes. There were no prolonged artillery barges, as on the Western Front. Instead, advance units, taking advantage of the cover of night and an incredibly fortuitous thunderstorm, surged toward Japanese positions. The element of surprise was total. Imagine yourself as a Japanese soldier standing guard at a fortified line. Rain is falling, thunder booming, and suddenly, out of this maelstrom, silhouettes of Soviet soldiers crash down upon you. They do not shout hurrah. They act swiftly and silently, capturing pillboxes while their garrisons sleep, cutting communication wires. This was not just a strike. It was a surgical incision that paralyzed the entire defense system before it could even react. Soviet air forces struck key nodes, railway stations, airfields, administrative centers, Harbin, Changchun, ports in Korea. The goal was singular: to deprive the Japanese command of the ability to move reserves or control troops. Airspace was cleared within mere hours. Thus began the Manchurian strategic offensive operation, which would go down in history as one of the swiftest and most effective campaigns ever. The Transbaikal Front, through fire, desert, and the Shingon. Marshal Rodion Malinowski, commander of the Transbaikal Front, received perhaps the most difficult task. His troops had to advance across the waterless Mongolian steppes and then storm what seemed an impregnable barrier, the greater Shingon mountain range. This natural fortress, with its steep slopes, deep gorges, and virtually no roads, was considered secondary and practically impassable for large troop formations, especially tanks, by the Japanese command. They were grievously mistaken. The main striking force was the 6th Guards Tank Army under General Kravchenko. Imagine, hundreds of tanks and vehicles carrying infantry moved not along roads, but straight through mountains. Soldiers often had to haul equipment up steep inclines by hand. Torrential rains turned the ground to mud, causing vehicles to bog down. Scorching daytime heat gave way to freezing nights. But the pace of the advance never slackened. While the main forces overcame the Shingon with unimaginable effort yet relentless determination, equally fierce battles unfolded on the flanks. Hylar, the fortress in the path. On the left flank of the front, the advance of the 36th Army ran into the formidable Hylar fortified region. This was no ordinary town. It was a resistance hub, a true underground fortress city. Numerous pillboxes connected by underground tunnels, minefields, anti-tank ditches, and multiple rows of barbed wire formed its defenses. The garrison numbered about 3,000 men, fanatically loyal to the emperor and ready to die. On the 9th and 10th of August, our forward detachments attempted to seize the fortifications on the move, but came under devastating fire. Attacks faltered. Only by the morning of the 11th, at the cost of extraordinary effort, did they manage to capture the railway station and power plant. Yet the main part of the fortified region continued to resist desperately. Fighting raged for every pillbox, every casemate. The Japanese fought to the last bullet, preferring death to capture. To break this resistance, command formed a special operational group reinforced with artillery. Only through massive bombardment and the incredible courage of infantry, who crept up to embrasures and placed explosive charges, were the main centers of resistance suppressed. The remnants of the garrison surrendered only on the 18th of August. Hylar became a symbol of the fanatical, desperate enemy our soldiers faced. Meanwhile, Kravchenko's tankers accomplished the seemingly impossible. On the 11th of August, advance units of the 6th Guards Tank Army, having crossed the mountains, emerged onto the eastern slopes of the Shingon and immediately captured the city of Lupe. This was a blow to the very heart of Japanese defenses. The road to central Manchuria lay open. The first far eastern front, taiga, pillboxes, and suicide fighters. While Malinowski's forces crushed the enemy from the west, the first far eastern front under Marshal Kirill Meretskov struck from the east. They had to break through the famous Japanese fortified regions, built and refined over more than 10 years. Once again, surprise was key. Advance units, without waiting for artillery preparation, attacked enemy positions at night during a thunderstorm. The Japanese simply did not expect it. Their long-term firing points, pillboxes and bunkers, designed to repel frontal assaults, proved useless against the swift raids of Soviet assault groups. But greater challenges lay ahead, the taiga and utter lack of roads. Tanks and trucks had to literally carve their own path through the forest. Special detachments were formed. Tanks rammed trees. Infantry cleared 5-meter-wide corridors, and sappers reinforced the ground. It was titanic labor. It was on this front that Soviet soldiers fully encountered the Japanese's most terrifying weapon, fanaticism. Suicide fighter, the phenomenon of suicide fighters, war without rules. Credit must be given to the Japanese soldier. He was brave, disciplined, and ready for self-sacrifice unto total self-destruction. The ideology of death for the emperor was no empty phrase to him. This gave rise to tactics for which our army was psychologically unprepared. Kamikaze pilots were thrown against Soviet tanks. Hero of the Soviet Union Dmitry Loza recalled how a Japanese plane crashed into the front of the lead tank in his battalion at low altitude. A second kamikaze aimed his aircraft at a building sheltering our paratroopers. Even more shocking were the infantry suicide fighters. They hid in specially dug foxholes, and when a Soviet tank passed overhead, they leapt out and threw themselves under the tracks with a mine or bundle of grenades. Others crawled up to vehicles and used long poles to push mines under the hulls. Commander of the 1st Red Banner Army of Fantasy, Belobordov, bitterly noted, "Our heaviest tank losses were not from minefields or Japanese artillery fire, but precisely from these suicide fighters." In the Dunedin fortified region, Japanese officers, seeing further resistance as futile, ordered their men to surrender. But the soldiers refused to obey and shot their own commanders. Here, war was fought to the death by its own monstrous rules. Hutu, the Tiger's Head Fortress. One of the most terrifying and impressive episodes was the assault on the Hutu fortified region, also known as the Tiger's Head Fortress. This was no ordinary fortified area. It was a gigantic underground complex stretching over 100 kilometers. Beneath the surface lay multi-story barracks, warehouses, power stations, and hospitals. Above ground stood immensely powerful artillery turrets. Imagine this: special armored turrets mounted with 75mm guns. Beneath the turrets were shafts through which elevators from deep underground delivered ammunition. The fortress was also armed with 305mm and even 410mm guns. These were true monsters capable of controlling all approaches. The fortress was stormed by forces of the 264th Rifle Division and the 109th Fortified Region. Fighting raged from the 9th to the 18th of August. The Japanese garrison fought with the desperation of the doomed. To destroy these armored turrets, heavy 200mm B4 howitzers, those famed Karelian sculptures, had to be brought in for direct fire from a distance of about 4 kilometers. Nearly the entire Japanese garrison, several thousand men, perished. Only a handful surrendered. The battle for Mudanjiang, the gateway to central Manchuria. A key defensive point for the Japanese on the Eastern Front was the city of Mudanjiang, known as the gateway to central Manchuria. The Japanese command understood that losing the city would open the road for Soviet troops to Harbin, Changchun, and Mukden, the heart of Japan's Manchurian Empire. All reserves were rushed there. The battles for Mudanjiang were perhaps the fiercest of the entire operation. The city changed hands several times. Lieutenant Colonel Boris Derivankin, a participant in those events, recalled, "The fighting for Mudanjiang was very terrible and fierce, often devolving into hand-to-hand combat. It was defended by about 5 divisions and 2 suicide squads of 200 men each. Many Japanese died there, but we also suffered heavy losses." In his memoirs, Marshal Meretskov described an episode in which the 9th Machine Gun Artillery Battalion captured 38 pillboxes and bunkers in a single day of assault. Imagine that hellish task: crawling under fire, placing a charge, detonating it, and tossing grenades into the embrasure. Resistance was so ferocious that our 26th Rifle Corps' forward units were forced to temporarily withdraw from the city. Only after regrouping forces and bringing up artillery was the city taken by storm a second time. The fall of Mudanjiang utterly demoralized the Japanese command. The road to Harbin lay open. The Second Far Eastern Front, the dash across the Amur. In the north, the Second Far Eastern Front under Army General Maxim Perkiev operated. His task was no less difficult: to cross the mighty Amur and Ushuri rivers, break through defenses, and advance on Chichihar and Harbin. Nature again worked against Soviet troops. Torrential rains caused severe flooding. The Amur overflowed its banks, submerging all riverside areas. Crossing points had to be chosen anew, right under enemy fire. The Red Banner Amur Flotilla played the decisive role. They ferried infantry and equipment under fire, and their artillery smashed Japanese coastal fortifications. Especially fierce fighting erupted over the Fujian fortified region. The town had been turned into a fortress. Every house was fortified and adapted for defense. The Japanese created an entire network of trenches and communication tunnels. The assault lasted several days. Only after Soviet infantry, supported by tanks and naval artillery, stormed the military garrison. Was the defense broken? On the 14th of August, the road to the major city of Jiamusi was open. Why did the defense collapse? Analysis of the defeat. Now let us step back from the chronicle of battles and ask the central question. How did a million-strong, well-equipped Kwantung army collapse in less than 2 weeks? Stratégique surprise. The Japanese command expected a Soviet strike, but not in August. They calculated the USSR would need at least 2 or 3 months to redeploy forces from the West. Stalin outmaneuvered them. Troop redeployment was executed in record time and with brilliant camouflage. Brilliant operational concept. The attack came from converging directions. The Transbaikal Front from the west through the Shingon, the first Far Eastern Front from the east through fortified regions, and a second Far Eastern Front from the north across the Amur. The Japanese were stretched thin along the border and failed to establish strong operational reserves in depth. Soviet pincers closed, splitting and encircling their grouping. Overwhelming superiority in mobility and equipment. The Japanese had almost no mortar tanks. Their anti-tank artillery was ineffective against Soviet T-34s and Shermans. Soviet air dominance was absolute, enabling strikes deep into the rear and paralyzing communications. Morale. The Japanese soldier fought desperately but ineffectively. His fanaticism often proved futile against the skill, initiative, and flexibility of the Soviet soldier, hardened by war against the Wehrmacht. Our troops could think outside the box, operate independently, and take responsibility. Local support. The Chinese and other peoples of Manchuria hated the Japanese occupiers, who treated them as slaves. They welcomed the Red Army as liberators, helping capture hiding Japanese soldiers and repair roads. This was a crucial psychological and practical factor. Capitulation, the emperor's voice. On the 14th of August, as Soviet troops raced toward key Manchurian centers, an extraordinary session of the Japanese government and Supreme War Council was held in Tokyo in the presence of Emperor Hirohito. A fateful decision was made to capitulate. At precisely noon on the 15th of August, the Japanese people heard their emperor's voice on the radio for the first time in history. It was unnatural and high-pitched. His speech was delivered in archaic court language, which ordinary people struggled to understand. But the message was clear. Japan accepted the terms of the Potsdam Declaration. The Mikado declared, "The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. Moreover, the enemy has begun to employ a new bomb of unprecedented destructive power. If we continue the war, it will lead to the annihilation of human civilization." Here, of course, he was disingenuous, citing the American atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The true reason for surrender was the crushing defeat of the Kwantung Army, which stripped Japan of its last hope of prolonging the war or negotiating from a position of strength. On the 16th of August, General Yamada Otozo, commander of the Kwantung Army, issued an order to surrender. But many Japanese units, either disbelieving the order or simply refusing to lay down arms, continued to resist. Isolated battles raged until the end of August. The Soviet General Staff was forced to officially declare, since Japanese troops continued fighting, combat operations would proceed until their complete disarmament. Soviet soldiers carried on their duty, sometimes suffering the bitterest final losses even after victory had been formally declared. The price of victory and its significance. What then was the outcome? In just 10 days, from the 9th to the 19th of August, one of the world's strongest armies was utterly routed. Kwantung Army losses amounted to about 84,000 killed and over 600,000 captured. Red Army losses totaled 12,000 irretrievable. The numbers speak for themselves. The significance of this operation is impossible to overstate. Lives saved. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of American and Japanese lives were spared, which would inevitably have been lost in an invasion of the Japanese home islands. End of the Second World War. The Second World War was officially concluded. The bloodiest conflict in human history passed into the past. Geopolitical realignment. The USSR regained southern Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands, establishing itself as a Pacific power. In China, the path to power was opened for Mao Zedong's communists, determining the country's fate for decades to come. A lesson of history. The world received further proof of the Red Army's might and professionalism, capable of executing operations of unimaginable complexity. This victory was won not only by generals and marshals. It was won by the ordinary Soviet soldier, who hauled shells across the Shingon ridges, charged pillbox embrasures at Hutu, and fought bayonet battles in the streets of Mudanjiang. It was his strength, his courage, his blood that placed the final period on the Second World War. This story deserves to be remembered, to be made into films and written into books, so that we, the living, understand the price and mastery with which peace was won in August of 45. Friends, our story has now come to an end. I hope it has sparked your interest in this great yet underappreciated chapter of history. If you found it as fascinating as I did while preparing this material, please do the following. Write in the comments what amazed you most: the fanaticism of Japanese suicide fighters, the courage of our soldiers, or the brilliance of the Soviet plan. Share this story with friends, so as many people as possible learn the truth about how the most terrible war ended. And, of course, subscribe to the channel. Many more incredible stories, forgotten battles, and historical investigations await you. Thank you for staying with us to the very end. Your attention is the greatest reward for the author. Until we meet again in history.